All right. Hi, guys. As promised, I will keep this as brief as I can. You know, 30-ish minutes, maybe less. Let's see how we do. The first thing I should mention before we get started, it's entirely possible Sam will come in here. I barely control him. So, yeah, that's the door. If anything's going to happen, it's going to be right there. You'll probably see it before I do. It'll be fun. Okay, to begin with, I've posted 2 items. I'm actually not sure how I'm going to do that just now. Anyway, one of them is a document. I know that. I'm holding a copy for myself right here. What you'll need to do is read it in just a moment before we can talk about it, but I want to introduce it first. What we're trying to do now, we're going to look at a student proposal. She wrote about a guy named Ned Fulmer, who I'd never heard of. I looked him up a little bit, and I think she actually does a pretty decent job in her proposal, talking about the guy and kind of filling in just some background knowledge, which is helpful. Here's what we're going to do. When you read the proposal, to the best of your ability, look for 2 things. Number 1, do you see a response? And this can manifest in a couple ways, but think to all the examples we've talked about the past couple classes. How do people tend to respond to the kinds of people we've talked about, right? And then once you suss that out, go looking for it. I happen to think it's pretty easy to find in this proposal. So yeah, look for that. Second thing I want you to look for, and it may or may not be there, but we need to look for it. Do you see an argument? Now, again, it's kind of early in the process. I'm not saying everybody has to have one, but we want to be looking for it. Do you see the kinds of argument we're trying to build in this paper? Kind of a yes or no. And of course, if you see it, where is it? That sort of thing. All right, so take a minute, pause the video, obviously, read the document, come back. I'm gonna give you a second to do that. Cool. All right, so what do we have here? Well, I would say the first half, basically, is a description of Ned Fulmer and how he fits into this group, the Try Guys. Cute name. So what's the deal with that first half? I mean, they spend a lot of time, third sentence, he was the guy who made his whole personality loving his wife. Oh, my hair is insane. And then after that, you get this longish description of him and these Try Guys people. The first thing that sprang to mind reading the first half of this proposal, the conversations we've had around branding and the way we view these people, right? We form our expectations based upon just what we see, which of course is all we can do, but we form a complete picture based upon very little information. And their brand seems to be goofy, wholesome, like they're wearing women's underwear, but not in like a, you shouldn't be allowed 500 feet from a school sort of way, right? Like more like, oh, look at these goofy guys. Like it's one of those type of, at least that's what it sounds like. So that's the setup, and I think it really matters, given all that, what this Fulmer guy did. And that brings me to the second half. I want to point out a couple things that I think are interesting. And again, not all of these will necessarily end up in a paper, but they should pique your interest. They should perhaps guide some of your research, some of your thinking. And I'm gonna try to go just down the page as they happen so you can follow along. Number 1, the first thing that stood out to me, and sometimes it's the way these things are worded. This part, during that weekend is how the sentence begins. Multiple fans alerted the Try Guys that they had seen Ned and an employee, and immediately I'm like, are they following this guy? Like, what? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, granted, people should not cheat on their wives. Like that's not, but what that's odd to me that he's being watched, kind of, right? Like that's interesting. A little bit further down the page, the news sparked their company, Second Try LLC, to launch a 3-week investigation into Ned's actions. like he murdered somebody. So that's interesting. We're going to keep going. I just want to build a picture here. A couple sentences further down, you get a great quotation from Eugene Lee Yang. He says, "We were acutely aware of just how contrary this was to the values of the company we've built and those of everyone who works here." He goes on to say, "This is something we took seriously. We refuse to sweep things under the rug. This is not who we are. It's not what we stand for." It's very strong language. What is he saying? Like, it's important sometimes, especially if I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here, when money's involved. We name multiple times their company. They have a company together. They're making money. And so he puts out, this guy, one of the members of their company, puts out a statement as a member of the company, if you follow me. This is not what we stand for. This is contrary to our values, things like this. That could be his honest opinion. You know, it's one of those things that's impossible for us to know. It could also be PR, damage control. Do you know what I'm saying? And what is he saying? He's saying this guy cheated on his wife with an employee. You'll hear it written about, and we're going to talk about research here in a second. You'll hear it written about in different places as an inappropriate relationship. That's either because he cheated on his wife, which is, you know, inappropriate, and or because it was an employee, which is inappropriate, but it's, anyway. The question we have to ask, and we're going to come to the response, which if you didn't see it, if you didn't find it, it's the last, I don't know, 8th of the proposal. We're going to talk about that. But I want to sum everything up before we get there. Why is he saying these things? What's the motivation, right? I'm cynical, you know, I own that. I happen to think they cut this Ned Fulmer guy out because they see the controversy, they see the backlash, it's threatening their wallets, you know? And look, I'm not knocking them for that, but it's interesting. What piques my interest, what should get us thinking in the ways that we've talked in this class, how do they frame that motivation? Like, they can't come out and say, man, you guys are gonna unsubscribe from us if we don't lose this guy, so sorry, Ned, I know we were buddies, type of thing, right? They don't do that. The language they use is very moralistic. Like we won't sweep this under the rug. What are you saying? Like, it's public knowledge, first of all. There's no like sweeping it under the rug. And just that phrase, right? It sounds like he's standing on a table, like to make sure everyone can see him when he says this. So that's interesting. And I think all of that leads into, that tone leads into the response. And I guess I'm going to read it in full. It's only a couple sentences, but again, I want you to really pay attention to the tone here, okay? The student says, she's talking about Ned Fulmer and I suppose this woman that he cheated with. They both were selfish in the fact that they did not even think about what their actions could have done to the people they supposedly cared about. They should be shamed for the rest of their lives. They destroyed so many good people's lives just for a selfish moment. The lowest thing a human being could do is what they did to all the people that cared for them. The positive side to this whole awful situation is that they get to carry this guilt for the rest of their lives. Guilt for ripping apart families, coworkers, and even friendships, all for one selfish moment. That is a strong response. The student here feels a certain kind of way about this, and I want to address that first. Many of you, not all of you, you know, because it depends on what you pick, but many of you will end up choosing a text, a person that you have some kind of knowledge about, you know, and much of the time, this can stem from the fact that maybe you followed them. It sounds like this student followed these people, feels a certain kind of way about it, right? That's okay, but what you have to do if you find yourself in that spot is guard against guard against that response in your paper, okay? What I mean by that is, what this has shown us, this response here at the end, I'm willing to bet, and of course I looked it up to get a better sense, that this response does a pretty solid job of summing up how a lot of people felt at hearing this information, okay? What we can't do in our papers is write a paper about that. We can't write a paper about how this guy's a piece of shit and deserves it, but that's not what we're doing, right? But we can now take that response that they've summed up really well, perhaps inadvertently, and try, like we've done the past couple classes, to think about where that comes from. The vitriol, if you don't know what that word means, look it up, but the heat in these sentences should be shamed for the rest of their lives. That's such a statement. Like these people, you know, on average are gonna live, say, 40 more years plus. They should be shamed for 40 years. All for one selfish moment. It was a relationship that went on for months. I'm willing to bet they might actually care about each other. Again, is it okay? I mean, no, but is it like the way we represent it, the way we talk about it tells us a lot about how we feel about it. And again, the question is, where does that feeling come from? Why do we feel so strongly about this fucking goofy guy on the internet? That's what he is. He's just a goofy dude on the internet. And here at the end, we're like, fuck that guy. Forever. So what is that? To begin with, like we said in the first half of the proposal, I think it comes back to this conversation about branding, right? Especially that it's this guy. Maybe some of the other try guys we wouldn't feel quite so strongly, although I'm willing to bet we'd still feel pretty strongly, given it seems like what their image sounds like. But he's the wife guy. That's his whole thing. The wife guy cheats on his wife? No. Right? So that's where our investigation starts. Thinking about why that brand, why the image we have of this guy matters to us so much. If you tie it into the response, I mean, one hypothesis I would offer, and again, this will vary based upon whatever text you choose, whatever person you choose. My first reading just from this is, you see a guy like this, and all you know of him is he loves his wife, and he's goofy, but like in a wholesome way, you know, and it's kind of like a movie, and it feels good, and he makes it seem possible, right? The fairy tale image we have that goofy people can love each other, and it's innocent and nice, and then that myth gets demolished, right? And we can't forgive him for that. Like, I hear Sam coming. I hear it. Sorry. He might come in. I don't know. Anyway, so then maybe one idea for this paper to start with is, why is that myth so important? Like, why do we cling to the notion that relationships are easy? I mean, look, I imagine most of you, maybe all of you, have been in relationships at one point or another, and you'll probably be in more. What's funny is some of you think you're never going to be in another one again. The one you're in right now is it. That's hilarious, by the way. But they get complicated, you know? It's definitely him at the door. I'm recording a thing for class, buddy. Can you hang out for a couple more minutes? Please? Hey, buddy, I'll come look at it in a minute, okay? All right, thank you. He wants to show me a thing. He's very cute. Where was I? Oh, relationships get complicated because people are complicated. People are not the images we have of them on the internet, right? We've talked about this a little bit. But the point is, we don't want to hear that. We for sure don't want to be faced with that knowledge, right? So you have to find a way to think about why it matters to us so much that we, and there's different ways to phrase it, but like, that we allow these people to trick us into believing that it's possible, right? Because that's kind of how that mechanism works. And we cannot forgive when someone betrays that trust, right? Even though, again, if we admit that we're trusting in a thing, that's a fairy tale. That's silly, you know? Like I love my wife, right? I'll be that guy. I'm Ned Fulmer. But, you know, there are days where she tells me, like, she tells me there are days she doesn't like me very much, right? It happens. Like, it's because we're people. So this is something to consider in this case. I want to sum up this first chunk, and then I'm going to move to research for a second. The response at the end, we cannot do that in the paper, but we can use that response. We can investigate that response and hypothesize why it occurs at all. Because I'm just going to say, I'm not trying to shade this student at all, but like, that's a really strong way to feel about an idiot on the internet. Okay, so let's move to research. Some of you may still be thinking, how the hell did we write this paper? That wasn't super helpful. This is how it starts, okay? The next move is just to go see what other people are saying. And it depends, again, on the text. Different texts are gonna offer different avenues for this. I've posted a link, and I say that knowing in this moment not quite how I'm gonna do that, but I'm gonna post a link to I guess an interview I found with the Try Guys. It's over here. I'm not like disappearing. I'm in Sam's room. This is not ideal. Anyway, it's with the Hollywood Reporter, which is reputable for what this is. The Hollywood Reporter is not where you would go for news. It's not the New York Times. It's not something like that, right? But they're interviewing the Try Guys. This is exactly the sort of publication this sort of thing would show up in. What I'm going to ask you to do, like I touched upon last time, I don't want you to read this entire interview. If I'm being honest with you, 90% of it is not super useful for our purposes, okay? What I want to try to do for a minute, and it'll take a couple minutes, skim this thing. Skim this thing to the best of your ability. What I'm telling you is, I'm guaranteeing you, there is a section of this interview that is terribly useful, that is terribly interesting for our purposes. And you could read the interview and find it, but that's gonna take a while. Skim. Skim for a minute. Again, pause the video here, skim through this interview, see if you can try to find the useful bit. And of course, read that if and when you find it. But go ahead and pause, go for it. I assume you're back. I hope you paused. We're on the honor system here. So what am I talking about? All right. I'm gonna try to just hold this damn thing right here. It's interesting. You for sure get the sense in the interview that the person, like, we're here to talk about the scandal. That's the only reason this person is interviewing the Try Guys, right? And they kind of touch on it in those first couple questions, and then they get away from it. They're talking about churros. Fun. No one gives a shit about your churros. No one cares. We want to talk about Ned Fulmer. And they get away from it. It seems like the Try Guys don't want to talk about it too much. So, like, you know, the interviewer, I think, is doing a great job at not killing the interview, which seems like maybe would happen, right? And I know that because at one point, and this is what piqued my interest, one of the Try Guys, I'm not sure which one, maybe it says, oh, it's Lee Yang. So it's the guy we have a quotation from in the proposal, says, I'd actually like to make a quick point about one of your earlier questions, if that's all right. As soon as I saw that, I was like, he's gonna say something. He's like, when a person says that, like returns to an earlier part of the conversation, that's them telling you, hey, I really want to say this. So we need to zero in on that. What happens? And I can't read all of it because it's long, but the interviewer just says sure, because I think the interviewer too knows, yeah, whatever you want to say, go for it. The section from Yang starts with, so it's interesting with this idea of newfound notoriety. Notoriety is like bad fame, okay? And he's going through, he talks about their image as happy-go-lucky, waggish pranksters suddenly dealing with something very serious. That's true, by the way. That's a great summary of how they're viewed as opposed to like the controversy that they were sort of mired in, right? And he goes on, he talks about this great work they've done with different, I suppose, foundations or whatever, right? You know, and yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like they're doing good stuff with some of the money they have. So cool. Okay. He goes on to the next paragraph. These things are serious. We want to make sure we talk about them. And he's coming to a point. He's coming to a point. It's in the last paragraph in this section. He's talking about SNL. Apparently they were parodied on SNL. The last thing he says, I think the public at large is mainly going to remember that our reaction was correct. Correct. That's a word. What does it mean to be correct? He doesn't say, that our reaction was the right thing to do or anything like. He says correct, as in on a math exam, you hope all your answers are correct. Your math teacher is not determining whether or not you've answered the questions in a virtuous way, right? There's a wrong answer. He's telling us, I would argue unintentionally, that they are aware that they're being judged by their fans, and they have to do what their fans have predetermined is the correct thing to do. That's interesting. It tells us a couple things. Number one, it tells us that they fully cut this guy out. Again, apparently they were buddies for years. Cut this guy out, not so much based upon like whether or not they disapprove or but based upon again, hey bro, this is a business decision. Sorry, we got a bunch of subscribers, man. We got money. See you never, type of thing. Because it's the correct thing to do. And it tells us that now we can dive more into, well, what is the correct thing according to these fans? It seems like it must have been to cut the guy loose. Why? So again, we return to this question of motivation. We can go a little bit further. Again, it's right after the Yang section here. The interviewer now is like, hey man, we're open. Like you finally got to what we want to talk about. The interviewer goes in for the kill. Speaking of SNL, there was a lot of criticism about their take. I'm wondering how you, Eugene, reacted to that sketch. Notice how short the answers are here. He had a lot to say a second ago. Answers are pretty short here. The next section, or rather the next thing the interviewer says, but their joke was that you were being puritanical. I'm gonna talk about that. That the scandal was really not that big a deal, that your buddy just had some fun. A publicist intervenes to request the conversation move away from Saturday Night Live. That's what the interviewer was worried about. We're gonna talk about this until we're not. And they shut that part down. We're not gonna talk about that. That's interesting, right? That's the heart of it. That's the heart of the issue here. This question of being puritanical. And by the way, some of you may not know what that means, but I would assume most of you are familiar with the term Puritans, right? New England, Pilgrims, all those people. We've kind of romanticized them in our history. To give you the really, really quick and dirty history, they were super virtuous, right? So much so that they couldn't take it in England. They went to the Netherlands. Everywhere they went, people hated them. And again, we've romanticized it like, oh, they were so pious that no, they were the kind of people that are so pious that they're going to let you know about it all the time, if you take my meaning. They were annoying to everybody. So they eventually had to leave. They came to America because nowhere else would have them. And they did. They would ostracize people. Again, we talked in the last unit about the Scarlet Letter. That's about Puritans. They were kind of dicks. If you stepped out of line at all, if you did the incorrect thing, right? So again, we return to this question. And the question at the heart of it, the vitriol the students seemed to feel, this guy stepped out of line. He didn't play according to the rules we've set for him. And again, if I'm being totally honest, like just say it one more time, you shouldn't cheat on your wife. You shouldn't cheat on your husband. That's not a thing people should do. But it does happen. And it's a private matter, right? Like if the CEO of Pepsi cheats on his wife, should we stop drinking Pepsi? I guess some people would feel like we should, you know? I feel like it'd be fewer people because that's not his brand. But the point I'm making is we seem to want to take these very human stories that are private and we want to get a hold of them. We want to be involved. We want to determine somebody's life as a result of that private thing, right? To put this another way, I'm willing to bet if he hadn't been cut out of the company, if he hadn't received like a ton of hate online and all this stuff, he probably still would have been punished for his transgression by his wife. Do you see what I'm saying? By his family falling apart. I feel like that's a pretty good punishment. I feel like he has a whole lot of like real stuff to deal with. I don't know that we need to get involved, but the point is we as a people, a society, a culture, do feel like we need to get involved. We need to pass judgment. We need to make this guy feel, again, like the betrayal we feel. I mean, quibble with the word if you like, but like, it's important to us that we express our disapproval, and that we affect this guy's life in a tangible way. It's important to us that that happens. Why? If you can take multiple runs at that question, and if you get something that feels like it could be again, we talk about disappointing people in your brand. We talk about people just wanting to signal that they would never do that they sort of uphold stronger values than this guy. That's where you get like puritanical angle. Something like that seems to be at the heart of this. That's where we need to move in these papers. That's how these sources can help you. Again, this interview is long, and again, if I'm being honest with you, mostly trash. It's mostly them talking about churros and dumb shit like that. No one cares. The interviewer doesn't even care. The trick is, like I said in class, look over sources. Use titles. You know, the title of this was, let me see if I can find it real quick. Try Guys ready to put Ned Fulmer, oh, I lost it. Sorry. Something about behind them, I think. Oh, Try Guys are ready to put scandal behind them with live fan event. As soon as I saw that title, I was like, yeah, I know what they're doing. The interviewer got him. Like, hey, you want to promote this thing? Let's talk about it. By the way, the real reason I want to talk to you, right? So that tells me as a researcher, most of the interview is not going to work for me, but that scandal bit, I'm gonna go looking for that. I'm gonna go hunting for that. You can skim, you can find it. Approach titles in that way, approach articles in that way. Sometimes you skim, you don't find anything. Move on, look for something else, right? Once you find something that's valuable, then you dive into it. That's when you write your bib, using that article. So if I was gonna write my bib, and I probably would if I was writing about this, if I was gonna write my bib about this interview, I wouldn't write about the whole interview. I mean, I guess my summary would start in an interview with the Hollywood Reporter. The remaining Try Guys sat down to talk about an upcoming live event, period. And that's the last time I'm going to mention that. During the interview, they're kind of made to talk about the scandal surrounding Ned Fulmer. One of the Try Guys in particular, Mr. Lee Yang, remarked, right, and from there, I'm just focused on that because that's all I'm going to use in my paper. Do you see what I'm saying? That's how you approach the bibs. I want to remind you, when it comes to the bib prompt, you can go back and look at it. There's a step-by-step process on there. I always get questions to the effect of, what are we supposed to do on the bibs? It's there. I'm telling you. You have a works cited entry that starts at the top. That's to help you out later in your works cited page. You can just copy and paste that guy. A couple sentence summary. I say of the source. Again, I would be even more pointed and say summarize the information from the source that you want to use. Sometimes it's the entire article. Most of the time, it's just a section. Yeah? Summarize that. Talk to me about, in a couple more sentences, how you think you might use this. In this particular case, I would use this, I would think about what Lee Yang, one of the Try Guys, says about the scandal and how that really reflects his sense of the public backlash, right? Because that's what we're trying to write about. After that, 2 quotations from the source that you might use. You might not, but 2 quotations that you might use. One of them, and I've scrolled up to find the title now, so now I gotta scroll back down. This will be fun. Or actually, she just says sure. Yeah, okay. I would absolutely quote the part where he says that our reaction was correct. That's going to be one of my quotations. You want to set it up contextually. You want to cite it according to MLA. Again, so you can copy and paste if you want to. And then talk about it a little bit. How might you use it in a paper? That's one quotation. The second quotation, if I'm being honest with you, probably wouldn't be a quotation. It'd probably be a paraphrase because it's not anything anyone says. But the moment when the interviewer, I guess you could quote the interviewer because they say puritanical, scandal, all these things that the Try Guys want to put behind them. We don't want to be associated with that. That's not our brand. You could quote that and then say that a publicist steps in and shuts the whole thing down, because that's interesting. And then talk about that. And that's one bib entry. And you do that 4 times, but don't freak out. You only have to do it 2 times before our next class, right? So if you haven't done any research yet, if you're still figuring out who you want to write about, that's okay. I would try to figure that out before this weekend, okay? But then before we meet, find me 2 sources. It doesn't have to be the entire source. I just want to say it one more time. But it needs to have some information in there that you can glean that helps you think about whatever the response is to this controversy, so that you can then, to the best of your ability, think about why people feel this way, why we respond this way. Because I just want to say it one more time as well. People feel strongly about this stuff. The vitriol at the end of this proposal from this student is strong. Is like, I don't know, man. It just keeps, I read it and it sounds like a victim's family at a murder trial. Like, it's strong. So why is that? Why do we feel so strongly about these people that we don't know, that don't affect our lives? Or do they? Do they affect our lives? Talk to me about that. All right. I hope you're all doing well. I'm gonna go see whatever Sam wanted to show me. I'll see you later. Thanks.